Welcome to Side by Side, a podcast where I, Robert Kuang, take you inside conversations with artists, creatives, healers, and warriors taking the charge in their transformational story. Today's guest is Elena Armijo, a master certified coach and former professional opera singer who specializes in executive and leadership coaching for high-performing clients. She is the founder of the C-Suite Collective, an executive coaching agency offering in-depth, customized programs for high performers, and she's the host of The Collective Corner, a podcast where badass, inspiring, and compassionate conversations get to flourish. In this conversation, we discuss the most pressing issues with clients and business leaders in 2025, and the way communities move forward during moments of crisis and conflict. You can find more side-by-side episodes at sidebysidepodcast.podbean.com. And if you'd like to connect with me about my services, please visit www.robertquanhome.com. It's a good time on Side by Side every time Elena comes back, and hopefully there will be many more. For longtime listeners, Elena has been on this podcast before where we caught up and talked about our life, coaching, artistry, singing, what have you. And now she's back after a little bit. So it's really great to see you again, Elena.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. It's always such a joy to come and talk to you. You're like a warm hug every time I come on your show. I'm like, my whole nervous system relaxes when I'm with you. So
thank you. Because I know sometimes we really get into the weeds with stuff, but I was like, that's partially why we want a good space for that as well.
Yeah.
And since we last spoke, LA has had some interesting developments. So I'm always, whenever I'm speaking to someone who I know is from LA or living in LA, I want to say like, let's catch up. How's LA? And what have you seen and experienced this year?
Yeah, well, let's see. I think the place to start is I just started my 4th year in LA, or maybe I'm coming up on the end of my 3rd year. I can't remember. Either way, it still feels very new to me. What I've been describing to people moving here from the East Coast, I lived, in the Brooklyn, Newark, New York area for 14 years. And then my partner and I relocated to LA in 2021. And what I've been telling people is I really have been unsure if I love this city. I've moved. I grew up in New Mexico. I lived in Seattle for 3 years during, living there during grad school. And I'm pretty quick to adjust to places, especially being traveled through singing. There were a lot of different countries I visited and places that I was at temporarily. So I don't tend to have a hard time grounding into a place. And for some reason, LA was difficult for me. I've really been fighting not liking it here. And part of that was I'm learning the New York mindset. When you bring it here and try to fit it in with LA, it just does not work. LA is like, we don't want that. We don't got place for that here. And I get that. It's really unfair to LA to bring that mindset here. And yet I was having a hard time meeting people. I loved the land. Like I love the nature. I love the water. I love the space. There's so much space here that we didn't have on the East Coast.
Right.
And still there was something inside me that was like nagging. Is this my place? Is this where we're going to be long term? And I couldn't get a solid yes. And then the fires happened. And that, to me, I did not expect to fall in LA during the fires. And that's actually what happened. We watched people come together in communities and support each other, just like people did during Hurricane Sandy in New York and other big events in different cities. And I'm surprised that it took that, a big event like that for me to actually see the city. So I think that's probably all on me. It has nothing to do with LA, if I'm being honest, and more about my context and the way I view things. But I really got to see a side of people that people don't often lead with here. They don't lead with vulnerability. They don't lead with connection and community, or at least not out loud in circles if you're not a part of those circles. It's very community oriented if you're in community circles. It was really special to see the whole city open up its heart and embrace just supporting people that were affected by the fires. And it didn't matter what income class you were or where you grew up or what, all the things that people were seeing in the news that don't live here. People were on the ground and they were helping.
Yeah.
And there's something about that that just had me go, okay, I get it. These can be my people, right? And we tried various ways to help as well, but there were certain times where we tried to help that they had way too many volunteers. It would have been
Mm-hmm.
us being in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, again, these were just signals that there's a lot more here to learn and to embrace.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that because not being in LA right now, although I did also recently make a cross country move. So I think that's partially why I wanted to ask you about that as well. People have a lot of doom and gloom about both the fires and also sometimes just LA in general anyway, whether it's the industries or the place itself.
Yeah.
Actually, somewhat similar to New York. People talk
Mhm.
about a certain jadedness in these big cities that attract a lot of people
Yeah.
and very aspirational people at that. So thank you for sharing some of the community experiences rather than maybe like more of like the headlines that people tend to get first, right?
Yeah, I just think, at the end of the day, people are people. And even in a bigger city, they really find their humanity during times of crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious what's been like a running theme in your work that you've seen, let's say maybe in the last year or the last few months, certainly. Maybe we can start there, particularly knowing that you work with a lot of women, a lot of people in leadership. Generally, when I speak with coaches, there tends to be like if the issue comes up with one person, it tends to come up with a bunch of people
Oh,
around the
yeah.
same time.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
what's been like the latest in your one on ones and in your work?
The latest flavor has been C-suite executives that are going through immense change. So I think a lot of that has to do with our time period in our country. We were in an election year last year. So that holdover from the change of government into this year really impacts everyone in the United States and really the globe, as we're seeing now. So, all of my leaders or people that are working on leadership skills or expansion of how they lead or who they want to be in the face of it has really changed course.
Hmm.
And I would say that it's less about developing a skill and more about crisis mode and resilience. And I really thought that we had kind of gone through that. We definitely went through that back in 2016 with George Floyd. And then we went through it again with COVID in 2020. And I thought, man, we've really learned resilience as leaders. And now I'm finding this last year that we're being called to more. And there's all kinds of reasons I think I believe that as a
Yeah.
as a coach and a human myself, like my own
Yeah.
personal beliefs. But that's been the theme for the year. Where can we ground in quicker? Where can we bring heart quicker? Where can we get the team mobilized together? Where can unity and trust occur? Trust has been a really big word in my space for the last year with all of my clients because a lot of trust has been broken along the way. And so while they're trying to lead these big movements or industries or organizations, they're having to find ways to source themselves quicker. And that really is, I know it's a bit of a context, but there is less time, less physical hours for them to do self-care the way they might have done when it's not crisis mode. So we're really in a lot of conversations about what does it look like to take care of yourself during crisis. That seems to be the theme for the year so far.
Thank you for being willing to share that and to be kind of clear about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes in conversation, we can spend a lot of time. Our goal is to avoid certain things or to minimize certain things. But
Mm-hmm.
then the conversation that we're having now is we're in it now. There's
Yeah.
no trying to avoid it or minimize it. It's here. What's next? What's the next decision? What's the next thing you got to look at?
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you for that honesty about that.
Which is different seasons of leadership, right? Because it's not that these clients haven't worked on other things in different years or different
Hmm.
styles of coaching that they have brought forward. But I think I used this analogy on a client call a couple weeks ago where, I said, if you're the difference between a doctor who works maybe in a hospital that is in one wing that isn't crisis mode versus a doctor that works in the ER and is always in triage. What's the difference of self-care that those people need? How do they train differently? What is their mindset? What is their level of empathy for themselves? When I use that metaphor, my client got really clear like, oh, this is triage time. This isn't actually, let me do my normal mode of operation where I would go slower or want this to go differently. We all want it to go differently, but we are in triage. So now what?
Mhm.
Right. And that was a really useful conversation for that client.
For you, what's been like the biggest illusion or let's say maybe false narrative, even if they were true, let's say once upon a time, but now it's just simply is not the case anymore? Have you
Mm,
experienced anything like that, like almost a veil? Because people have spoken about having that experience since the pandemic,
mm,
basically,
mhm.
of experience of veils being lifted again and having for us to confront certain things, right? So I'm wondering if you've had flavors of that in your personal development or in your work of like, oh, this narrative that I believed in has basically been dismantled, right?
Yeah, I'll start with my work first because I think that's the clearest one I have access to. I remember when I gave a presentation at the ACTO conference, which is a beautiful organization for coaches to do training and community. And I signed up with a dear colleague of mine, Liz, who we went in and we trained some coaches on the concept. And this was probably back, I'm trying to think, this was back in probably 2018, if I'm guessing. And we brought the idea that context cannot be separated from lived experience. And at the time, that was kind of radical for the coaching industry because the coaching industry was leaning heavily on context is the thing to roll with and shift in clients. And there wasn't really any training out there that honored lived experience side by side with context. And so I remember at the time how hard it felt to bring that conversation forward and experiment with it. And I didn't know what I was doing either. It's not like I had the answers, right? Like I'm over there trying to figure out like, okay, there's something here, but what is it? And now in 2025, you could not convince me at all that these can be separated.
Mm,
They are one and the same. They are so important to our humanity. They are so important in the coaching world and how we address our clients somatically and through more diverse conversations. And they create so much empathy and healing in the coaching container. And yeah, I think that's a big shift. In 2018, I wasn't sure. And now I'm like, whoa, I can't even believe that was a conversation back in 2018.
mm,
So I think that's one thing that I would say has drastically shifted. I think personally, I've really been playing with this conversation in my personal life. And this is deeply through my partner. You know, a lot of the work we're doing in our relationship, we've been together 9 years.
mhm,
And man, the span of that 9 years looks so different from where we started to where we are, which I imagine most people say. But one of the things that I have been really that like the cloud has been lifted from my eyes is a lot of the ideology around the feminism movement and what it's caused in men and disconnection in men,
mm,
and how women are not actually having a conversation about who we can be responsible for the things that we require and ask of men in relationships. And I'm speaking from a heteronormative approach, but I imagine there's a lot of identity crossover that exists in other relationships as well, which is, again, a brand new thing I'm exploring. But I'm really curious where this concept of people, but especially our men that we're seeing who have high suicidal rates and are very lonely and depressed, especially in the heterosexual arena, like what can women actually be responsible for in that conversation? And it's tricky, right? Because women are still getting oppressed as well. We see that in our government. We see that in everyday life. There's still a lot of things that women have to account for safety and being aware of things that are happening to them. But for the people that have done work, and especially I would say people now, both outside of just men and women, people that are aware and have worked on themselves and have grown and have done conscious work in those relationships, where can you actually push the boundary of being heard and listened
mhm,
to and held and connected? And I'm super interested in that because, my partner, I'm very, very lucky. He's done a lot of work
mhm,
and he is a safe place to explore that conversation. And I realize that's a privilege and not everybody has access to that. But it's been really eye-opening to me to see where women are perpetuating things with each other and with that then spill out into conversations. And that can get even more existential when I think about women creating life. And
mhm.
if they're the people that give life and are the mothers of the earth, What's actually going on. It kind of feels like a conversation in 2018. It's like new and cloudy and not distinguished, but I'm curious about it. And I wonder if in another 10 years, we'll be having a different conversation.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to the work part that you mentioned first because they were both
Yeah.
so powerful to me. But I always, yeah, so with context for listeners, people talk about it in different ways, but I always think of it as your frame of reference or,
Mhm.
like you said, your lived experience, your internal narratives, and your beliefs all shape your context, which influence how you choose to respond to certain things and the choices you make, right? And I always struggled with that because I saw so much power in saying that's just a context. That's just your context, right?
Mhm.
But it was very difficult to not make it feel like a personal issue when I knew there was no structural possibility about certain
Ah,
things.
beautifully said. Yes.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
I knew, like, for example, the hospital you work at, the company you work for, there are certain things you have to be clear about, right?
Mhm.
And so within coaching, we think of infinite possibilities. But there are times where I feel like in order to do that shift, I had to disidentify from myself, which was just not possible, but also for people who have tried for any reason, it's a deeply painful experience, right? It
Extremely
just,
painful. Yeah.
yeah, it's like a lifelong failed experiment, or it can leave you
Yes.
feeling that way.
Yes, and I actually think it's why we're losing some people to coaching, right? Like meaning like people don't even want to entertain coaching is when they don't see the ability to find themselves in a different story or context that they want to try on without leaving themselves behind. Then some people are just out. They're out of the conversation. And that
Hmm.
to me is really sad because it could go another way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've trying to hold the both and multiple things are true has been something of trying to cultivate, but harder to kind of articulate sometimes, like you're
Yeah.
talking
Yeah,
about.
for sure.
And then second part about relationship of people of different genders and things like that. Obviously, that's an
Mhm.
ongoing conversation.
Mhm.
It's something that's deeply impacted me and my relationships for sure. So I
Mhm.
guess my overall question is, I'm curious what you've seen, what's changed for particularly women in leadership over the years, how women in leadership see kind of these issues, gender based issues and things like that. And I don't know if there's been
Yeah.
change over the past few years or just some things that you feel like is more important now about that.
I think there has been change, which is good news. I think if we look at an older generation, let's say the 80s or the 90s of women that were in leadership positions, so C suite roles, senior vice presidents, senior managing directors, like top of their professions, right? Typically, there weren't many of them. So there weren't a lot in the room to begin with. My perception, which again can just be my lens, is that a lot of women from that era had to be a certain way to get there. So there was, again, kind of what we're talking about in the coaching conversation, where there was a distancing of themselves that had to happen to take on more traditional leadership skills that would be valued to get in the room. So kudos to those ladies, right? Because without them going first, there would be no opportunity now for what we've seen shift. I really want to acknowledge that generation. And there was a bit of an overswing, which is what all happens in anything we're trying to change, right? And what ended up happening is in those spaces, all of a sudden, those women had to experience some of the same issues that other leaders had in those positions that they'd never had an opportunity to be confronted with.
Mm-hmm.
And with the overswing, we saw top down leadership. We saw women on women being really hard on each other. We saw women being more and more disconnected from their emotional center and not bringing emotions into the workplace because again it was a survival technique. It's how they got there. It was what was having them win, right? So when the overswing happened, I think we really saw some of that breakdown of what I'm talking about: connection, emotional leadership, connection to men or people in those spaces that they were working with. So what I love about where we're at now is we have women that are in those spaces that have done a lot of work around who they are, what they believe emotionally, what are they feeling. They're not making their feelings wrong, but they're also not necessarily just leading with feelings, right? Which again,
Mm-hmm.
the older generation was in an either or conversation about that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And which, I get. It was really
I
hard.
I think men too for sure. It's win or
Yeah.
lose, black and white.
Yeah, all of that, right? And I think where we're at now is we're starting to see a lot more nuance in spaces. Like I think about one of the teams I work with, man, they're just such a cool leadership team. There's 12 of them on the leadership team. There's so much diversity on this team with all the identity markers you could think of exist on this team. And what I really love about that is that there's an opportunity in that room now to have all voices heard, emotion be present, but logic and reasoning be present as well. Accountability be present, because this is another thing that I've been looking at a lot as a woman is what does accountability look like for us if we were taught that not having it was okay and we could get to the top through other means.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really excited about the shift that I see in those spaces because they're playing, and through playing there's innovation and creativity, and there's more possibility than we've ever had for people to feel seen and heard and be seen and heard, but to experience what that creates at a high level. So I don't know where it's going to take us. I think there's a big backlash happening for that right now. I think people are scared because my belief is what's happening in our country is it's the last stand of the old power, right? It's the last resistance to the traditional way of leading, getting scared and going, no, we want it to be the way it always was. And I think there's so many more people that know it can go differently now, that it's just a much richer conversation.
I love your connection. You're connecting between play and innovation
Mm.
because that's such a cool thing to tap into if you can in coaching or in client work and whatnot, and also just in yourself. Sometimes I think it's just the way we've been conditioned. We tend to think the best solutions tend to have the most challenge, perhaps, or is the most challenging for us. But sometimes it's how can we get the most support, right? How can we have fun? How can we have safety and pleasure and even comfort, which is not really always the priority inside of like coaching conversations. If you've tried every possibility that you can imagine, it may be time to sit down and drop all of that and play and imagine and experiment. Or one of my favorites these days is to talk to somebody. Talk to somebody with a different perspective.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah. And I really mean that. Like, I love that you said that, but let's highlight that. Talk to somebody with a different perspective and talk to listen, right? And I don't mean, I'm not saying like, I would consider myself a moderate liberal. I am not a far left liberal, probably more moderate in general in anything. And when I talk to my liberal friends, I'm like, when's the last time you sat down with somebody who's a Republican and actually listened to them? Right. I think that's, and it goes for both sides of the street since we're kind of in a binary country, even though the independent party is really trying to have a voice in the middle. That to me is what we've lost in unity, is listening and being able to come to the table and respect the other side while keeping our beliefs and creating a solution for all. When I talk about DEIB right now, I've been, my roots have been in DEIB work for a while now, especially in the coaching world. And I have always said all means all. That means all. That means every single person, whether you like them or not, whether you think that they are evil or light, all means all. So if we really believe that, who are we going to be about it from that standpoint? And sometimes people just get so afraid that they forget that. They forget that they can expand and have a different conversation.
What do you think? And this is one where I was like, there's no right answer, totally. But what do you think is the best way to move forward when there is a lack of agreement?
I think that we are about to see the biggest revolution of what happens when people can put down their armor and get to humanity again. I don't know, I don't know what it's going to look like. I think it might be really hard before it's really good, but I do believe it will be really good. I think we're going to have to go through a lot, and a lot of pain is going to emerge before people can actually bring forward the most authentic version of their voice to be a collective. So I actually think that's the solution, is what would it take to be a collective instead of what group wins, what group doesn't, how we make it fair for everybody. I think fair is a good conversation, but the higher level conversation is how do we all live together and be a community? So there's been community that's been lost. I don't have a specific way that goes. I think it can be created from many different ways if that's the commitment.
Yeah.
But I don't hear that being the commitment in our country. There's lots of other commitments floating around, but a commitment to unity and cultural community seems to be missing right now. So that would be where I point everybody is what if that was the highest commitment, then what?
Yeah. When you say be vulnerable with each other, I also hear maybe dropping the ego a little bit. There
Mm-hmm.
have been often, this happens all the time, that comes up in coaching, which is we get caught up in situations, arguments, or discourse that is more built on ego than actually, anyone having a positive outcome out of it. It's not even about, sometimes more willing to follow the ego and
Mm-hmm.
just ignore the pain that is causing us and everyone around us. Yeah, so definitely very much aligned with you about what does inclusivity look like? What does unity and safety look like? What does a strong nation look like? We're having to have some very tough conversations around that. Everyone is complicit in some ways. So in thinking about, disagreements and agreements that just come up as a part of life, I'm curious for you, what are some important points in your life where you were maybe faced with a no or had to say no? How
Mm-hmm.
do you know when to say yes or no, thinking back to those moments of no?
I think it always comes back to my values, which can be tricky, right? Because you can convince yourself your value is anything in the world, that your
Yes.
values are, integrity and love, and those are my values. But when they're used as a weapon, that's where it gets a bit sticky, right? So when I've had to say no to something, honestly, it's the collective mindset. I'm thinking recently of something with my company where I was thinking about moving it forward into something else. Or I should say, it's not my company; it's actually the collective's company, the TCC. We recently have expanded, and now we are all owners, or the partners that have chosen in are owners, and are becoming a true collective, which is what it was born to do. It was always meant to be that way. And the thing I noticed is that when there was a disagreement in the space about who we are, what we're going to be, the place that had me say no and keep moving was when there was a detriment to more people, to the entire collective. So again, if the commitment is the collective, right, then it was holding that commitment through some really tough conversations. And that's not easy because there's pain and people get hurt. And as a leader, did some wonky stuff around like armoring up and being defensive myself. And I learned a lot that I still really trusted the vision, and I'm still trusting that. I don't know. We'll see where we end up, right? But that's the path I chose. And what I notice is as long as I can remember that my way is not the right way, but it's a way that I choose, then more can arise. But if I'm choosing it because my way is the right way, or I need
Mm-hmm.
you to agree with my way to change your mind or your opinion or your lived experience, that's my telltale sign that my ego is involved and that this
Mm-hmm.
is not actually a conversation that's useful
Mm-hmm.
for the commitment.
Yeah.
So I think I've been, that's kind of been my check in with myself. And then, I mean, most recently, I have ADHD, and
I
I,
didn't know that.
yeah, I didn't, I'm 44 and I didn't know it till I was like 40. So,
There you
you
go.
know, I'm learning about it too. And one of the things that I know about my ADHD is that if I don't actually take care of myself, which sometimes looks like slowing my brain down, sometimes it looks like letting my brain run, right? Like going
Yeah.
out for a walk
Mm-hmm.
and listening to a podcast and listening to the birds and talking to my dogs and doing all the things at once. Like that, sometimes that can be really fueling for me. And sometimes meditation and slowing down, which I hate meditation. I got to just be honest. Like I do it and I commit to it. I'm doing
Yeah.
it 60 minutes a day right now for the last like 7 weeks. And man, it's a struggle to get on that mat for me. I'm not one of these people that loves it and enjoys it and can sit there. When I'm in it, I understand the benefit for my soul and the connection with
Mm-hmm.
spirit. And when I miss it, I can tell that I've missed it because I'm not clear or focus. But I don't love it. So even something like that, right? As an example of
Mm.
where am I willing to choose from commitment instead of enrolling myself to love everything about what I see or what I believe.
Yeah, interesting. That's very like neutral, detached of you, almost. Like I don't have to love it, but I'm committed to it and I know why I'm doing it, basically.
Yeah.
I'm clear.
Yeah.
It's almost like, not to get too woo woo, but there was almost like then your emotions can be whatever it needs to be. You're already clear
Right.
almost.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which was a big deal for me because there's parts of myself that I don't love that I've been trying to change for my whole life instead of just letting
Yeah.
them exist and be okay, right?
Sure. Yeah. We all
So
do. Yeah.
that's part of a practice of that is
Hmm.
can it just be okay that I don't love it,
Right.
you know?
Sometimes that's very freeing.
Yeah, I felt so. It certainly gave me the innovation that I needed to take it on, because before in my life, I needed to love it to do it, and that was
Hmm.
just like a losing game. I was never gonna get on the mat from that place.
That's so true because, it's almost like, what am I doing this for? What do I get out of it? Which is
Mhm.
such a transactional way of us thinking about our daily
Yeah,
lives and what we choose to do, right?
yeah,
And
for sure.
but also like an hour, holy cow.
It's crazy. I know. I don't know.
For
We'll
for
see.
someone who's like, I'm in deep struggle, I was like 2 hours a day, babe. I don't know. Maybe you're
Yeah.
not.
Yeah, exactly. And that's true. If somebody was like, "You need to be on the mat for 3 hours," I would be, "Absolutely not." So,
You have your
maybe
limits.
there's
Okay.
limits to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and is it just curious, is it like seated, or are you someone who's like, like a walking meditation is meditation
Oh,
as
yeah,
well?
no, seated. It has to be seated and focused
Okay.
because otherwise my brain will focus on other things, right? Walking around
Yeah,
and
yeah,
doing
yeah.
other things. So, so for me, it's seated. Yeah.
But it's also so true. My partner has ADHD, and sometimes it's like, what do the kids say? Bed rot, whatever, brain rot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
They're like, I need to like, I don't want to like engage with something intellectual right now. Please give me my bubble. And then other times their way of resting is like, I'm gonna knit like 3 hats this weekend, and it is
Yeah.
genuinely
Yeah.
relaxing. You know
Yes.
what I mean? It's just like thing,
Yeah.
and it's just noticing your rhythm and actually being okay
Mhm.
with it in some ways. Like I've noticed.
That's beautifully said because I really feel like it's not only being with your rhythm, it's allowing your rhythm to be like I won't say crazy. It's not crazy, but different,
Yeah.
right? Like I craved for it to be consistent for so long because then it meant I could control it and I knew who I was and I was consistent for other people. And only recently have I been like, this is not going to be consistent and that can be okay. And as long as I honor whatever shows up in the moment, in alignment with my values and not, being a crappy person in the world, that's more loving to me than trying to make myself a certain way to adhere to like the norm, the center norm.
I'm curious because you're a vocalist, you're an opera
Yeah.
singer. Even the way you speak, I can hear it. When I was editing our last podcast conversation,
Oh
you
yeah.
you had the most even breathing of my life, and it was audible. That's literally just the waves. I was like, oh my gosh, this person has practiced even breathing for a long
Oh
time.
yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was like, you were just so good with that. And in any case, I think right now I've noticed, particularly for, let's say, younger folks, but lots of people, there's a fear of speaking out. There's already a
Mm.
fear about censorship, let's say, that's been coming up more and more.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
That's
then
fair.
traditionally, historically, speaking out, public speaking has always been like a pretty nervy thing for most people, right? And
Yeah.
so I wanted to ask you just like, I suppose, tips and tricks, or just like your perspective around how can people get comfortable with speaking up? The thing is, even when they don't want to, because another consequence of not speaking up is just complete disengagement. If no one
Yeah.
speaks up in a
Exactly.
group session, nothing happens.
Exactly. Well, the tips and tricks are nervous system regulation.
Yeah.
So, when I used to get on stage, I used to squeeze my hands and dig my nails into my hands because it reminded me that I was alive or that I could feel my hands and that I was there before I took a step on stage.
Hmm.
Same thing when I was actually on the stage speaking or singing, I would feel my feet. It was constant, like sending breath to my feet. And all of that was just resetting my nervous system to be able to ground it into the ground physically wherever I was. Because when I get nervous, I tend to lift out of my body and come from just my head and disconnect from my body. So I think the first step is noticing, what does your body actually do when you're afraid? Because
Mm.
everybody's body is different and you might need different things. But if you're disconnecting, just some ways to actually ground your body again. If you're feeling too heavy in your body, then we need to do the opposite. We need to actually like send a beam of light up through your head, right, to the universe, or different modalities that have you lift your body out of the ground instead of sinking into the ground. So I think the tips and tricks are different based on what you're doing. I think breath to me is the most magical thing we have on this earth, outside of herbs for medicine or Western medicine or food. Any of that can support us in our nervous system, but breath is the one thing you have that you have instantly attainable to you while you're living. And breath cleans out so much. It cleans your blood literally in your body. The blood oxygen cleans itself out when you're breathing. And most of us don't know this, but you tend to walk around using only 20% of your breath capacity as a human. So it's only people like singers or athletes or people that are needing more breath to create something that understand or get the awareness that there's so much more breath available to us than we know, because you don't
Mm-hmm.
actually need a lot of breath to live walking
Mm.
around every day in life. So I would say to people that are nervous around speaking out, explore how much breath you actually have to ground your body or to expand your lungs or to do square breathing or tactical breathing from the military to reset your nervous system, because breath is key in any sort of vocalization. It's actually the thing that makes your vocal cords work. It's not your vocal cords, right? It's the breath that's going through your vocal cords that makes them ring and sing and speak. So breath is really magical. And I don't think
Yeah.
it gets enough credit, in the world.
I think I've had about the same amount of conversations with vocalists as I do with
Yeah.
like Buddhists or meditation teachers
Sure. Yeah.
about breathing, because they're both super vital, because there's something about the musculature of like we're in our body, but I
Yeah.
think there's like an intangible spirit as it's attached to our voice and what we think
Yes.
and feel. It's such an important part of us to nurture, and yet I see,
Yeah.
my partner is teaching in university now, and there's just a lot of disengagement as a result of just people not using their voice. I think opera and singing is one breakthrough, and I've also heard, for collaboration, learning how to collaborate and have those skills, do some chamber music. So again, it
Oh,
goes back to
yeah.
the arts and humanities
Yeah.
for me, find the
So
breakthroughs
good.
there. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, I wanted to answer the second part of your question because I think it's really important, which is the speaking out, right?
Yeah,
Especially
yeah.
when we're afraid. So the way that I have been thinking about this question is that it's exactly what you said. Not speaking out costs you your dignity and your soul in the long run, right? If you're swallowing something or you're staying small to stay safe, on one hand, there is a physical safety aspect of not dying, like speaking out and not dying. So I think you got to choose who you're going to be in this world and what that will cost your soul when you are taking your last breath in life. And that's a tall order, and it's a large ask. And it's a privileged ask for some, for those of us that have the ability to even do that. I was recently on a call with my coach. I think this was like in January, right after the elections. And I was like spinning out. I was like, this is going to get bad and people are going to get deported and people are going to get put in prison and disappear. And people are going to like it's going to get really, really bad, which is my way of processing the way that my brain, not my body, likes to work, is to think of the worst scenario so I can be prepared. That's my version of safety, right? It's not
Hmm.
necessarily healthy, but that's what I do when I'm afraid. What I had in my conversation with her was, okay, let's play the worst scenario out. My business is taken from me. I'm imprisoned. All my rights are taken away. I'm living as a servant to the government. Like, let's just play that scene out for a second. Well, I don't wish that for anybody. The question that she asked me, which I think was really brilliant to work with me and my fear, was, well, who else would be in that room? And when I thought about who else would be in that room beside me, like all of the people in history who have been imprisoned or locked up or murdered or their lives taken away for what they believe, I was like, oh, that's actually the company that I would want to be at company with. Like, I'd want to be sitting in a jail cell with those people. And if if that leads to death, can that be a so be it conversation from commitment and courage? And again, I struggle with this conversation publicly because it's a bit of a martyrdom complex as well, and it can easily dip into martyrdom. I don't think that's what I'm trying to say, but it certainly helped me ground in my commitment and my values to go, okay, I'm clear. I'm clear where I sit.
Yeah.
Without the fight and the rage. And it doesn't mean that I would fight and hurt other people, but I certainly won't silence my voice.
No, absolutely not. It's so interesting. I've never heard someone talk about envision who else might be in that scenario with you, even if it's a crisis
Yeah.
scenario. It's
Yes.
just another way to get outside of yourself and you're also like your bubble of fear for a
For
minute.
the collective.
Already about imagining something in the future, perhaps, right? And to ground yourself in like what the reality would be. The reality is, if you're going through a crisis, there are many, many people who are experiencing the same thing. And therefore,
Right.
you are not alone. Things can happen out of that. So thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. I
Yeah.
have a another, I guess not easy, another one that I know people sometimes like to dodge, or but these conversations around money and finance and material
Yeah.
resources,
Sure.
like it's pretty important for coaches to navigate that with
Yes.
in our work. I'm curious lately because it always happens around times of uncertainty. What conversations look like right now for people around money and finances, and just overall kind of just curious about your perspective around that right now.
Yeah. I'll speak from the lens of being a coach rather than my clients, because I think clients, depending on their industry and where they are, they might be in different conversations around that. But in general, as a coach, the way that I've approached money, and I think has been a really successful way to approach it, is that the work works. And if I trust my work, then everything else will fall in line. So it is a big trust piece with me in the building of my business. And I launched my business in 2015. So this is actually my 10-year anniversary
That's right.
uh, as a coach. And so when I launched, I just did the work. I took as many calls as I could. I coached as often as I could. I remember charging $5 for a cup of coffee when I first started coaching versus where I am now. I'm at the top of the market as what coaches make. I would say I'm definitely in the top like 3% of what coaches make in the world. What I notice is that we are in a business that no matter what's happening in the world, coaches are needed. So there is some privilege in that, right? Not all jobs are like that. And I really believe that no matter if times are good or times are bad or times are in between, coaching is a good industry to be in if you can really trust the work works. So that's number one. Number two is diversify. I meet a lot of coaches who want to go down a road with one niche.
Mm-hmm.
And while I completely respect and honor that that might be who you love to work with, me too. I have my lane that I love to operate in. I'm always looking to diversify my business because I believe just in any business, diversification, just like I believe in communities and collective and different voices and rooms, makes it a much more stable and innovative and creative practice in business. So, what that looks like for me is looking at ways I can partner with people that are other coaches in the world. It looks like all different types of clients. I still have sliding scale slots for people that I love to work with that can't necessarily afford me. I love working with innovators and creative people. I love working in industries I don't necessarily agree with, right? Like that's another way to diversify my portfolio as a coach. And I love, I've just started recently to get interested in boards and investing in businesses I believe in. So I think you got to think multidimensionally when it comes to the energetics of money, because if it's just transactional, like we were talking about everything else today, it's a very limited game that you're playing with the energy of money. And I've always believed that. I think I've been pretty lucky because my father instilled some good money habits from when I was young. And then through my own growth, I've been able to expand what money means to me and what the energetics of it are. And I've been allowed to play with it from that lens. So not everybody has that opportunity, but you can look at how you're holding money and the diversification of what you do have, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's $5 or more, and see what you can create with it.
I think it's such an important conversation inside of coaching conversations about like the way you spend money, the way
Mm-hmm.
you make money, and
Yep.
the way you save money. These are all such important ways to look at yourself and the way you're being.
Yes.
And as much as there are, like we mentioned earlier, there are realities and structural things in place. But I do try to remind people that prices and dollar values are man made, they always have been. And the other thing is, like a positive profit margin
Mm-hmm.
can look like many different numbers, and it can still be a positive outcome compared to the way it was before. So you don't
Yeah, for
necessarily, it's
sure.
not necessarily a failure to say you didn't hit an exorbitant profit margin, right?
Exactly.
But also there's a lot of intentionality behind why it may be meaningful to aim for a positive goal like that, even if it's in terms of materials. Because then you get to, I do notice, even if people are saying like, it doesn't define who I am, when they find big financial success,
Mm-hmm.
I do notice the way they choose to use money is quite different. And I think that's
Yeah.
also very important. And that can
Yes.
alter the future. So one of the things that you mentioned just now is about like who you work with and finding the right collaborators and things like that. So you have a long running ongoing podcast where you've spoken with a lot of
Yeah.
creative minds,
Yeah.
including yours truly. And also you are part of this collective, right? Where you do like group engagements and things like that. So I'm just curious, what have been some of your maybe favorite guests or podcast moments that were like light bulb moments for you? I know
Hmm.
sometimes I have those, but also just some of your favorite collaborators.
Oh my gosh, that's such a big question. I love all my podcast guests because they all teach me something. So I will start there. Like I don't have a favorite. That would be really hard to to pick because I think the people that I invite on the show are really innovative, disruptive, courageous. That's why they're on the show, right? Because of who they are. So I learn every time I do it. It's why I keep doing it. Like I'm pretty sure, like maybe I have like maybe 100 people that listen to my podcast. So it's not like a ton of people that are listening all the time. But I love doing it. I love the conversations, and I always learn something. So I hope whoever's listening gets something for themselves when they listen. It's a service-based thing for me. So
Yeah.
that's why I do it. And then the collaborators that I love, man, I love coaches that are good coaches. I'm surrounded by some of the best coaches in the industry, and I am so grateful for that. I think of everybody who's a part of the collective who said yes to this crazy idea that we still don't have any idea if it's going to work. We're still experimenting away and trying to build a brand and a business, and they just are so willing to say yes and play and create. And man, I feel so lucky. I really do. That I get to be surrounded by these people. And I mean, I could list all of their names,
Yeah.
right, that are
No,
part of
absolutely.
it. There's not a single one of them that I don't treasure and love and adore and respect. And it's just so much fun. That's the thing I really want to say is even if the business itself doesn't generate something that's, a $10 million company in the future, the key is the people.
Yeah.
And as a coach, collaboration has me not being out there alone, which I think is awful in any profession. And it's what entrepreneurs and solopreneurs deal with a lot.
Yeah.
So it was such a gift to be able to create a community where we could just be together and be a brain trust. Call each other up and say like, hey, I'm struggling with this client, or hey, I got this really cool contract and I'm thinking so and so and so might be great on it. And what do you think? That part is fun. And I think that we as coaches need more of that. And everybody's too busy to create it, right? So it's like always a dream and nobody does it. And I'm glad that TCC exists for that reason.
Yeah. Everyone talks about it, but sometimes who's going to go through the discomfort of like growing it, right?
Yeah, because it takes a lot, right? It takes a lot of energy. And I'm just grateful that people were willing.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing quite a few people in that crew, certainly people should check out your space as much as possible. So thank you so much for your time today. And I certainly just took up every minute.
No, I love it. This
just
like so fun.
Asking you with these kind of somewhat serious questions. I'm certainly going to put where people can find you in the episode description, but real quickly while we're here, where can people find you specifically and also maybe the collective as well?
Yeah, you can find both myself and the collective on LinkedIn. Also our websites, elenaarmijo.com is my personal website, and then the c-sweetcollective.com is the collective website. And I mean, we're around. You can find us anywhere. Just go look for us and we'll reach back out.
For sure. Thank you so much for your time today, Elena. It's always a pleasure to dive in.
Thank you.